In a dental office, Deborah Prum examined the panoramic X-ray of her skull. The Halloween-like image, with its empty eye sockets, triggered memories of her 2 brushes with death, events that would later be classified as near-death experiences. Deborah's first encounter with death occurred during childbirth. What began as an early labour rapidly deteriorated into a medical emergency. Her blood pressure soared to stroke levels, her platelet count plummeted, her liver function deteriorated, and seizure activity complicated her condition. As a midwife struggled with a catheter, the obstetrician commanded urgently, "Get her into the operating room now." What happened next defied medical understanding. Deborah suddenly found herself, or what she would later describe as her essence, floating near the ceiling in the corner of the labour room. From this elevated position, she observed with unusual detachment as medical staff rushed her physical body to the operating room while attempting resuscitation. She experienced no fear, no anxiety, only a strange, dispassionate awareness of the scene unfolding below. The medical team performed an emergency C-section to deliver her son, who would spend approximately 2 weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit. Deborah's condition remained so precarious that doctors placed her in a medically induced coma for 3 days. Even after emerging from the coma, health complications persisted for months. Throughout this difficult recovery, Deborah shared details of her out-of-body experience with only her husband Bruce, a physician. Unable to make sense of what had happened, she focused her limited energy on caring for her fragile newborn and regaining her strength. Nearly 15 years passed before Deborah would again stand at the threshold between life and death. Her second near-death experience occurred on February 14, 2007, on a bitterly cold Valentine's Day. Deborah wore her mother's wool Chesterfield coat, a garment she rarely used. She and Bruce planned to meet 2 other couples at a restaurant called The Local in downtown Charlottesville. As they approached an intersection, Deborah's last conscious memory was relief at spotting a green traffic light ahead. They were running late, and the prospect of driving through without stopping momentarily brightened her mood. What happened next would alter the course of her life. An unlicensed driver in an unregistered SUV barreled toward the intersection, failed to stop, crossed into their lane, and collided head-on with their Volvo at over 40 miles per hour. The impact transformed their vehicle into twisted metal and shattered glass. Deborah lost consciousness immediately. The airbag struck Bruce, breaking his glasses and cutting his forehead. When he turned to check on his wife, he found her unresponsive. Despite his medical training, he could detect neither breathing nor a heartbeat. Panic overwhelmed him as he repeatedly called out Deborah's name. In the moments following the crash, Deborah experienced something profound. All sense of self, of being Deborah, vanished entirely. In its place came a sensation of complete peace, unlike anything she had known before. At her core, she felt utterly safe and at home. Deborah found herself immersed in what she later described as a glowing yellow light. The sensation was unlike anything in ordinary experience, though she compared it to being suspended in a vat of pudding, but pleasant, comforting, even blissful. Far from feeling dead, she felt more intensely alive than ever before. A euphoria washed over her as she sensed her essence within a greater life force. Years later, she would draw parallels to string theory, feeling like a closed loop of energy, both part of and distinct from the rest of existence. From a great distance, she heard Bruce calling her name. Rather than providing comfort, This familiar sound caused irritation. She felt a strong resistance to leaving this state of perfect peace. In retrospect, Deborah could not recall making a conscious decision to return to her body. She questioned whether she possessed enough sense of self to make such a choice. Later, she would become emotional when recalling this resistance, wondering if her reluctance represented a betrayal of her loved ones, or perhaps simply longing for the peace she had experienced. When Deborah regained consciousness, she experienced a complete absence of pain, despite the severity of the crash. It took several moments to process that they had been in an accident as she stared at their crushed Volvo. She observed the headlights from the other vehicle shining into their car at an unsettling angle. Surreal light illuminated particles floating in the air, perhaps fragments from the airbag or a substance from the engine. Outside, smoke or steam rose in the cold February air. She saw someone with long hair running past their car, waving his hands frantically. Later she would learn this was the driver of the other vehicle. Turning toward Bruce, she saw his face covered in blood, his glasses broken. He appeared to be speaking, but she couldn't understand his words. Deborah's next clear memory was of a different man opening the passenger door. This stranger appeared to be in his 40s, with curly hair and a receding hairline, wearing a button-down shirt without a tie. He told her, "I'm going to release your seatbelt, but I don't want you to move unless the engine catches fire. I will stay with you until the ambulance arrives." The man knelt outside the car and held her hand until paramedics arrived. Months later, Deborah was startled to learn that Bruce had no memory of this man. He insisted he had seen no one interacting with Deborah except the emergency medical technicians. Despite attempts to locate witnesses who might have seen this Good Samaritan, they found none. The man's identity remained an unexplained aspect of Deborah's experience. The collision left Deborah with deep bruising to her ribs and chest. For several months, each breath felt as if her chest were wrapped in barbed wire. She underwent therapy to reduce a large hematoma over her heart. She often wondered if her mother's heavy coat had saved her life that night. Following this second brush with death, Deborah again shared details of her experience only with Bruce. She withheld these details from her family, not wanting them to know how close she had come to death. In the weeks after the crash, she said nothing about her experience to friends or colleagues, uncertain how to explain what had happened without inviting skepticism. By training and disposition, Deborah was inclined towards skepticism. Her work as co-director of a research centre at Dartmouth Medical School had cultivated in her a pragmatic, evidence-based worldview. She often compared herself to the biblical Thomas, who insisted on touching Jesus' wounds before accepting the resurrection. It required two separate near-death experiences for Deborah to acknowledge their reality. She questioned whether she would have believed others' accounts without her own experiences, and concluded she likely would not have. For 13 years following her second near-death experience, Deborah maintained silence about these events. Around 2020, a friend lent her a book about near-death experiences by a researcher at the University of Virginia. This prompted her to explore other scientific studies on the phenomenon. She was shocked and comforted to discover many accounts in the scientific literature matching her own experiences. Having a recognised term for what she had experienced made her more willing to share her story with others. Despite this validation, Deborah neither sought out nor met with others who had undergone near-death experiences. Perhaps she feared someone might pressure her into accepting their particular explanation for these phenomena. While she considered that her perspective might evolve, she wasn't ready for such encounters. Deborah approached the interpretation of her experiences with caution. She recognised that past experiences couldn't provide certainty about future ones. Nevertheless, she found reassurance in having experienced no emotional distress or physical pain during either episode. Whether rationally justified or not, she did not dread death, though she acknowledged this sentiment might change. Her faith in God was neither based on nor necessarily strengthened by these experiences, but she expressed gratitude for having survived and maintained curiosity about what the experiences might signify. When sharing her experiences with others after 2020, no one openly expressed doubt. Typical responses included relief at her survival or acknowledgement of life's mysteries. She felt that even if someone accused her of fabricating the events, she wouldn't be troubled unless they were mocking her. She wasn't trying to prove anything. Her memories remained clear and consistent with journal entries from those periods. Deborah grew up in a small church, composed primarily of her Protestant Italian-American family. Her grandfather and uncle delivered sermons, her aunt led the singing, and her father served as a deacon. They taught that when a person died, they fell asleep until Resurrection Day, when they would face judgment based on their behaviour. They didn't believe in hell. Though she respected her family's beliefs, Deborah's spiritual journey led her in different directions. She attended various Protestant denominations, each with different perspectives on the afterlife. By 2022, she remained uncertain about what happens after death and was not preoccupied with establishing doctrinal certainty. By the time she shared her story publicly, Deborah considered herself less religious and more spiritual. She focused less on religious rules and more on listening for spiritual guidance. She felt connected to others but was not anxious about convincing them to adopt particular beliefs. While she maintained belief in God, her conception had become more expansive and flexible. She had, quote, let God out of the box she had created, making life feel both more terrifying and more exciting. Deborah's near-death experiences brought the finite nature of life into sharp focus. She rarely procrastinated, never completely convinced that tomorrow was guaranteed. Rather than finding this depressing, she found it motivating. This awareness drove her to pursue her passions, learning to paint portraits in her 50s, mastering her mandolin, and purchasing a pickup truck for outdoor adventures. Aware that her life would eventually end, she felt compelled to extract meaning from each day. During difficult times, Deborah sometimes experienced longing for that yellow pudding state, a realm that had felt more like home than any place on earth. Yet this longing never reached the point of wanting to leave her current life. The connection to loved ones and curiosity about life kept her anchored in the present. The identity of the mysterious man who helped Deborah after the accident remains one of the most curious aspects of her experience. Who was this calm figure with curly hair and a receding hairline, dressed like an office worker who appeared at precisely the right moment, comforted her, and then vanished without a trace? Some might interpret his presence as that of a guardian angel or spiritual guide, a compassionate being sent to ease her transition back from the yellow light to physical reality. Others might view him as a manifestation of her consciousness, attempting to integrate the profound experience she had just undergone. The fact that Bruce has no memory of this man and no witnesses could ever be found to confirm his existence adds a transcendent quality to Deborah's already extraordinary account. Perhaps most telling is that Deborah herself offers no definitive explanation, maintaining the same open-minded curiosity about this figure that characterises her approach to the entirety of her near-death experiences. Although happiness sometimes proved elusive, Deborah experienced moments of joy when she remembered to notice them. Enjoying Sicilian pizza, watching sunsets over her meadow, or having meaningful conversations while kayaking. While curious about what might await beyond physical existence, she remained engaged with both the challenges and joys of her earthly life. In a meaningful coincidence, on the day in 2022 when Deborah was writing about her experiences, a friend who had no knowledge of her essay texted her a quote from Elizabeth Barrett Browning: "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God." For Deborah Prum, writer, former medical researcher, and two-time survivor of near-death experiences, these words resonated with profound truth, reflecting her transformed understanding of both this life and whatever might lie beyond.